Tonight, we explore what happens when the institutions we trust to protect our children become the architects of their suffering. Before we begin, these are atmospheric horror stories, horror that crawls under your skin and lingers. So if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now let me tell you about Claire Dooney, and the field trip that taught her the most dangerous predators wear smiles and badges. The permission slips had come back, signed in September 23, careful signatures from parents who trusted her. 4th grade was the year of the farm visit, a tradition at Millbrook Elementary that stretched back decades. Claire had been teaching long enough to know that traditions persisted not because they were good, but because they were familiar, comfortable, safe. Harrow Creek Farms was all three of those things, according to the brochure. A historical agricultural site, it said. Educational opportunities in sustainable farming and natural resource management. The photograph showed red barns and golden fields, children with dirt under their fingernails learning to plant seeds and gather eggs. Wholesome. American. Innocent. Claire should have noticed that the brochure was printed on expensive cardstock. She should have questioned why a working farm needed such polished marketing materials. She should have wondered about the chain-link fence visible at the edges of certain photographs, or the way the smiling staff members never quite met the camera's gaze. But she had been teaching for 11 years, and she was tired, and the permission slips were signed. So when the yellow school bus pulled away from Millbrook Elementary at 8:30 on that October morning, Claire sat in the front seat and told herself this was just another field trip. Just another Tuesday. Just another group of 10-year-olds who would be sticky with excitement and boredom by noon. The drive took longer than expected. The farm she knew sat close to town, visible from the highway. But Harrow Creek was different. The bus turned off the main road, then again onto a smaller road, then again onto something that was barely paved at all. Trees pressed close on either side, their branches reaching overhead to form a tunnel of rust and gold. Beautiful, if you did not think too hard about isolation. Picturesque, if you ignored the fact that they had not passed another vehicle in 20 minutes. Nate Patterson sat in the 3rd row, humming tunelessly and kicking the seat in front of him. He was small for his age, with dark hair that never stayed combed, and eyes that were always moving, searching, cataloging. He reminded Claire of a bird, the way he tilted his head when listening. She liked Nate. Most of the teachers did not, found him too energetic, too distractible, too quick to wander. But Claire understood that some children were simply built to move, to explore, to test the boundaries of every space they entered. She had no way of knowing that this particular quality would nearly destroy him. The bus slowed as they approached the entrance. A wooden archway stretched across the road. Harrow Creek Farms burned into the timber, in letters that looked older than they should be. Beyond it, fields extended in neat rows. Corn. Soybeans. Something else Claire did not recognize. The earth looked dark, fertile, well-tended. A red barn sat in the distance, exactly like the brochure promised. And there, at the gate, stood a man in clean coveralls, his smile wide and practiced. "Welcome, welcome," he said as Claire descended from the bus. His handshake was firm, his palm dry despite the October heat. "I am Director Pewitt. We are so glad you are here. Director, not Mr. Not farmer. Director." Claire filed this detail away without knowing why it mattered. The children tumbled from the bus in a cascade of noise and motion, their voices high and excited. Claire counted them automatically. 23. All accounted for. She made a mental note to count them again before lunch, and again before boarding the bus. This was procedure. This was how field trips worked. You counted, and you hoped the numbers stayed constant. Director Pewitt led them down a graveled path toward the barn. He spoke as they walked, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a tour guide. He told them about crop rotation and soil pH and the importance of pollinators. The children listened with varying degrees of attention. Nate did not listen at all. He was looking past the barn, toward a cluster of smaller buildings half hidden by a stand of pine trees. "What is over there?" Nate asked, pointing. Director Pruitt did not pause, did not break stride. "Storage facilities. Nothing interesting for young people, I am afraid. Now, who here has ever seen a chicken up close?" Hands shot up. Nate's hand did not. He was still looking at the buildings, his head tilted, bird-like. Claire saw him mouth a word. Not storage. Something else. She could not quite read his lips. They saw the chickens. They saw the goats. They stood in the garden and learned about companion planting, about how certain vegetables protected each other from pests when grown together. The children asked questions. Director Pruitt answered them with patience and warmth. Everything was exactly as it should be. Claire counted them at noon. 23. All accounted for. They ate lunch in a covered pavilion overlooking the fields. Sandwiches from home, juice boxes sweating in the October warmth. The children spread out on benches, forming their usual clusters. The loud ones together. The quiet ones together. Nate sat alone at the end of one table, eating his sandwich in 3 large bites and then standing, already restless. "Stay where I can see you," Claire called. Nate waved without looking back. He wandered toward the edge of the pavilion, toward where the manicured lawn gave way to taller grass and wildflowers. Claire watched him for a moment, then turned to help Sophia unwrap her sandwich. When she looked back, Nate was gone. Not gone, just out of immediate sight. She was not worried yet. Nate was like this, always drifting, always curious. She called his name. No answer. She called again louder. Several children stopped eating, watching her with the uncanny perception children have for adult anxiety. "Stay here," Claire told them. "I need to find Nate." She walked to where she had last seen him, her footsteps crushing the dry grass. The field stretched before her, endless rows of something green and waist-high. Corn? No, the stalks were wrong. Something else. And beyond the field, perhaps 100 yards distant, she saw them. The buildings Nate had asked about. They were larger up close, industrial-looking. Concrete and corrugated metal. Definitely not storage sheds. And standing at the entrance to one of them, small and impossibly far away, was Nate. Claire called his name. The distance swallowed the sound. She started walking, then jogging, then running. The plants caught at her clothes, their leaves rough against her skin. Her breath came hard. How had he gotten so far so fast? But when she reached the building, Nate was not there. The door stood open. The interior was dark, cooler than the outside air. Claire stood on the threshold and felt every instinct she possessed scream at her to step back, to leave, to gather her students and demand the bus driver take them home immediately. But Nate was in there. Her student. Her responsibility. The small boy who hummed tunelessly and tilted his head like a bird. She stepped inside. The space was long and dim. Windows set high in the walls, let in slanted light that revealed metal doors set at regular intervals along both sides of the corridor. Not doors. Cells. These were cells. And at the far end, disappearing through another doorway, she saw Nate. Nate. Her voice echoed wrong, flat and dead despite the concrete walls. She ran after him, her shoes loud on the floor. Through the doorway. Down another corridor. The temperature dropped with each step. The smell changed, became institutional. Disinfectant and something underneath it. Something organic and wrong. She found him in a room marked Section C. The door was open. Nate stood just inside, frozen, staring at something Claire could not yet see. His face had gone blank, empty of the curiosity that usually animated it. He looked younger than 10. He looked breakable. Claire grabbed his shoulder, pulled him back, and saw what he had been looking at. The man was tall, gaunt, with skin that had not seen sunlight in months or years. He sat on a narrow bed bolted to the wall, and his eyes, when they focused on Nate, were not the eyes of someone entirely sane. They were wet, desperate, hungry for something Claire did not want to name. "Jacob," the man said. His voice was soft, almost tender. "Jacob, you came back." "I am not Jacob," Nate whispered. "I knew you would come back. I knew they would bring you. Come here, son. Let me look at you." Claire pulled Nate behind her, her heart hammering. "We are leaving. Now." But the man was standing, unfolding from the bed, with horrible grace. He was smiling. "You cannot take him. He is mine. The director promised. He promised I could have my son back if I was good, if I did what they said." The sound of footsteps behind her. Claire turned. Director Pruitt stood in the doorway, and his practiced smile had been replaced by something harder, more administrative. 2 other men flanked him, large and expressionless, wearing uniforms Claire now recognized as corrections officer attire. "Mr. Polk," Director Pruitt said calmly. "Step back from the door, please." The gaunt man, Mr. Polk, stopped. His face crumpled, childlike. "But you promised. You said if I completed the program, if I participated, if I was good." "I said no such thing. You know that." Director Pruitt's voice was gentle, almost kind. The kindness made it worse. "Back to your bed now." Mr. Polk sat. He was still looking at Nate, his eyes full of something that might have been love in a different context, in a sane world, but here looked like hunger. Director Pruitt put his hand on Claire's shoulder, steering her and Nate out of the room. The door closed behind them with a heavy metallic sound. A lock engaged. Multiple locks. "This way, please." They walked in silence, past the cells, past the other doors with their small wire-reinforced windows. Faces appeared at some of those windows. Blank faces. Watching faces. Faces that had learned not to hope for visitors. Claire kept her hand on Nate's shoulder, felt him trembling beneath her palm. When they reached the outside air, the sunlight felt obscene. Too bright. Too cheerful. Too indifferent to what they had just witnessed. Director Pruitt sat them down at a picnic table, far from the pavilion where the other children still ate lunch, oblivious. He folded his hands on the weathered wood, professional, regretful, utterly in control. "This is a state rehabilitation facility," he said. "We provide agricultural vocational training to individuals transitioning back into society after incarceration. The farm is real. The program is legitimate. But we must maintain certain security protocols." Claire stared at him. "You bring school children here. To a prison. Not a prison. A transitional facility. There is a difference. And yes, we host educational visits. Part of our funding comes from demonstrating community integration. The state requires it." That man thought Nate was his son. Raymond Polk. Director Pruitt said the name carefully, like handling something fragile. "He killed his wife in front of his 8-year-old boy, then spent 14 years in maximum security. He is here because a psychologist decided he was rehabilitated enough for a less restrictive environment. He's done very well in our program. Until today, there had been no incidents. No incidents." Claire's voice was shaking. "He tried to take my student. He made no threatening movements. He spoke. That is all. Mr. Polk has boundary issues, but he is not dangerous when properly supervised." The staff were seconds away from intervening, if necessary. If necessary. Claire felt something hot and sharp rising in her chest. He is 10 years old. He will have nightmares. He will need therapy. Do you understand that? Director Pruitt leaned forward. His eyes were kind, sympathetic, immovable. I understand you are upset. Any teacher would be. But I need you to understand something too. What happened today was an unfortunate but not hazardous situation. Nate wandered into a restricted area. We have security protocols in place to prevent exactly this kind of incident. Those protocols functioned. No one was harmed. He was terrified. He was startled. There is a difference. Director Pruitt smiled, and Claire realized with a cold shock that he was very good at this. This was not his first time managing a situation like this. Now, we need to discuss what happens next. The other children did not see anything, correct? No. Good. That simplifies things. Here's what I am going to suggest. You take Nate back to the bus. You tell the other children he felt sick. We called his parents. They are coming to pick him up. You continue the field trip as planned. We have a corn maze and a pumpkin patch the children have not seen yet. We make this a good day for them. And then, when you return to school, you write in your report that Nate had a stomachache and had to go home early. That is all. You want me to lie? I want you to be appropriate with the information you share. Those children are 10 years old. They do not need to know that people like Raymond Polk exist. Their parents do not need to know their children were brought near a rehabilitative facility. The school board does not need to know that a field trip approved decades ago now includes a component they might find concerning. And Harrow Creek Farms continues to receive state funding for community integration programs, which allows us to continue the important work of rehabilitating men who have paid their debt to society. He paused. Everyone wins, Miss Dooney. What about Nate? Nate will be fine. Children are resilient. Much more resilient than we give them credit for. Claire looked across the field toward the pavilion. She could see her students, small and bright in their field trip clothes, eating their lunches and laughing. 22 of them. All safe. All innocent of what had happened 100 yards away. 23, if you counted Nate, who sat beside her with his head down, who had not spoken since they left Section C. And if I do not agree to this? Claire asked. Director Pruitt's smile did not change. Then I will need to file a report with the State Board of Education about a teacher whose negligent supervision resulted in a minor entering a restricted area, potentially endangering both the minor and facility residents. I will need to recommend that Millbrook Elementary be removed from our approved visit list, which means no more field trips here for any grade. I will need to notify the parents of every child present today that their children may have been exposed to unnecessary risk due to inadequate supervision. I will need to do many things, Miss Dooney. And at the end of all those things, Raymond Polk will still be in his cell. You will likely be looking for a new job, and Nate will still remember every second of what he saw today. Claire's hands were shaking. She put them in her lap where Director Pruitt could not see them. You have done this before. I have managed complex situations before, yes. It is part of my job. And I am very good at my job. He stood, brushed invisible dust from his coveralls. Take your time. I will have someone bring Nate's backpack. When you are ready, rejoin your class. The corn maze is quite impressive. The children will enjoy it. He walked away, unhurried, comfortable. A man who had navigated this exact conversation so many times it had become routine. Claire sat with Nate in the too bright sunlight. She could hear her other students laughing in the distance. She could smell the earth, rich and fertile, the smell of growing things. The smell of harvest. Nate, she said quietly, look at me. He raised his head. His eyes were dry but wrong, too old for his face. What you saw was very scary. That man was confused. He was not going to hurt you. Do you understand that? Nate said nothing. Do you understand that? He wanted me to stay, Nate whispered. He thought I was his son. His son is dead, isn't he? Or wishing he was dead after what he saw his father do. And that man is still here. They let him live here, where kids come for field trips. Claire had no answer that would not be a lie. They sat in silence for 5 minutes. Then, 10. Finally, a staff member brought Nate's backpack. Claire took it, thanked him, and led Nate back toward the bus. She told the driver Nate was feeling sick, needed to rest. The driver, who was reading a paperback novel and wanted to finish his chapter, did not ask questions. She rejoined her class. She led them through the corn maze. She helped them choose pumpkins from the patch. She counted them before they boarded the bus. 22. All accounted for. When they returned to school, she told the principal Nate had gone home sick. She wrote it in her field trip report. Stomachache. Minor. Nothing concerning. And she told herself that this was practical, that this was protecting the other children from knowledge they did not need, that this was being professional. She told herself these things, and she almost believed them. The nightmare started for Claire 3 days later. The same dream. Every night. She was back in Section C, but the door would not open. And Raymond Polk was standing, reaching, his voice soft and loving, as he called her by her daughter's name. She did not have a daughter. That somehow made it worse. She saw Nate in the hallway one morning talking to another teacher. He looked fine. Normal. He was humming tunelessly, that same habit he had always had. But when his eyes met hers, something passed between them. A recognition, a shared knowledge, the understanding that they both knew something terrible, and they were both pretending they did not. She wanted to ask him how he was sleeping. She wanted to ask if he had told his parents. She wanted to ask if he hated her for putting him back on that bus, for choosing the comfort of 22 children over the trauma of one. But she did not ask any of these things. She smiled. She said hello. She walked away. 6 months passed. Then 7. Claire told herself that everyone was fine, that Nate was fine, that her decision had been the right one. She told herself this every morning, and some mornings she believed it. In April, an envelope arrived at her home address. Plain white, no return address, postmarked from the state capitol. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It looked official, state government letterhead. A release form. She read it twice before the meaning penetrated. Raymond Polk had completed his rehabilitation program. He had demonstrated consistent pro-social behavior, participated in vocational training, shown remorse for his past actions. The state psychologist had signed off. The review board had voted. Raymond Polk was being released back into society. At the bottom of the page, someone had added a handwritten note in blue ink. He asked about the boy. Wanted to know his name. Thought you should know. No signature. Claire sat at her kitchen table holding the paper, and the terror she had been swallowing for 7 months rose up like bile. She thought about calling the police. She thought about calling the school. She thought about calling Nate's parents and telling them everything. Protocol be damned. But what would she say? That a man who had served his time, who had been officially rehabilitated, had once mistaken their son for his own? That he had asked about him the way a confused person might ask about a kindness received? What law had been broken? What actionable threat existed? None. That was the horror of it. There was no crime in Raymond Polk's release, no policy violation in Director Pewett's facility, no grounds for alarm in any official sense. Everything had functioned exactly as designed. The system had worked. The protocols had been followed. The forms had been signed. And somewhere in the state, Raymond Polk was walking free, carrying with him the memory of a 10-year-old boy who had looked enough like his dead son to wake something in him that 7 months of rehabilitation had not managed to bury. Claire thought about that boy Jacob, the real Jacob. She thought about what he must have seen, what he must carry. She thought about how he would be 18 now, maybe 19. An adult. Old enough to have escaped his father's shadow, or old enough to have been crushed by it. She thought about Nate, who was still 10, who still sat in her 4th grade classroom, who still hummed tunelessly and wandered and tilted his head like a bird. Who would be in middle school soon, then high school, then college. Who would grow up and maybe forget that October day, or maybe not. Who would carry it with him either way, the knowledge that monsters were real and wore coveralls, and called you by another child's name. She thought about the 22 other children who had eaten their lunches and walked through the corn maze and chosen pumpkins and gone home happy. Who did not know? Who would never know? Who she had protected at the cost of her own sleep, her own certainty that she had done the right thing. And she thought about all the other schools, all the other field trips, all the other teachers who brought their students to Harrow Creek Farms. How many? Over how many years? How many permission slips signed? How many buses dispatched? How many children walking past Section C without knowing what it held? How many Nates? How many near misses? How many incidents managed with practiced efficiency by Director Pewitt and his careful smile? The brochure sat in her desk drawer at school. Educational opportunities in sustainable farming. Historical agricultural site. She had never thrown it away. She would not throw away the release form either. She put it in her desk drawer at home, beneath old bills and expired insurance documents. She would keep it there, and she would not look at it, and she would not think about it unless she had to. This was how complicity worked. This was how systems perpetuated. Not through malice, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small, reasonable decisions made by people who were tired and scared and trying their best. That night, Claire dreamed she was standing in the field again, calling Nate's name. But when she reached the building, the door was locked. And through the wire-reinforced window, she could see them. Dozens of children, hundreds, all of them standing silent and still in identical rooms. All of them wearing field trip clothes. All of them waiting. She woke with tears on her face. She did not know if she was crying for Nate, or for herself, or for some larger sorrow she could not name. In the morning, she got up. She went to school. She taught her class. She counted her students, and they were all there, all safe, all accounted for. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. And in a small apartment somewhere in the state, Raymond Polk was making breakfast, thinking about agricultural work, thinking about his son, thinking about rehabilitation and second chances, and the small dark-haired boy who had looked so much like Jacob, who had come so close. In his mind, they were still together in that room. They were always together in that room. And in his mind, the boy had stayed. Fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is a test. And some tests, once failed, define everything that comes after. The scariest monsters are not the ones who hurt us. They are the ones we allow to hurt others, because we are afraid of what speaking up will cost. And by the time we realize what we have done, it is too late to change anything except ourselves, and that particular transformation, that living with what we chose, that is a horror that has no ending, no resolution. No moment of waking to find it was just a dream. Some nightmares we create ourselves, with the best of intentions, with signatures on permission slips and silence that feels like mercy, but is only fear dressed in professional clothing. And sometimes, late at night when sleep will not come, we understand that the most terrifying thing we ever did was nothing at all. Tonight, we explore what happens when charity becomes condemnation, when the act of giving becomes an invitation to something far darker than we could ever imagine. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what is the current time there. Now let me tell you about Alice Brennan, and the coat that should never have existed. Alice Brennan was 31 years old when the coat arrived at her Scottsdale townhouse, wrapped in tissue paper the color of old bones. She had been scrolling through Vestigages, that particular online boutique where influencers went to find vintage pieces that looked expensive, but cost less than authenticity should allow. The algorithm knew her well. It understood her grief. Her mother had died 3 months earlier. Breast cancer, stage 4, discovered too late. Alice had been holding her hand when the monitors flattened into that terrible, endless tone. The inheritance was modest, the medical bills were not, and Alice found herself buying things, small beautiful things, to fill the hollow spaces her mother had left behind. The red velvet coat in the listing photograph looked like something from a dream, from a time when elegance was not negotiable, when women wore their beauty like armor. The description was sparse. 1920s. French craftsmanship, minor wear, utterly unique. The price was absurdly low. $375 for something that should have cost thousands. Alice bought it at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, scrolling through her phone in the darkness of her bedroom, where her mother had never been, but somehow still felt absent. The coat arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The fabric was softer than anything Alice had ever touched, plush and dense, the color of arterial blood in candlelight. The lining was silk, butter yellow, and smooth as water. She pulled it on immediately, standing before the full-length mirror in her hallway, and felt something settle over her shoulders that was not quite weight, not quite warmth. Beautiful, she thought. She looked beautiful. It was only later, as she hung the coat in her closet, that she found the note. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, folded into a tight square, and tucked deep into the left pocket. Alice unfolded it carefully, half expecting it to crumble in her hands. The handwriting was cramped and slanted, the ink faded to rust brown. The language was French, but Alice had studied French in college, back when her mother was still healthy, back when the future stretched forward like an open road. She translated slowly, her fingers cold. To whoever wears this garment, you must understand what you have accepted. The coat carries a passenger, an appetite that does not sleep. 7 days you are given, 7 nights to prove yourself worthy. You must give the coat to the poor, truly and without condition, or the demon will claim what you have borrowed. Midnight of the 7th day. No exceptions. May God have mercy on your soul. Alice read it twice, 3 times. Then she laughed, brittle and sharp in the silence of her empty home. A curse. Of course. Every vintage piece came with a story, and the more elaborate the story, the better the resale value. This was marketing, nothing more. Authenticity through mythology. She wore the coat to brunch the next morning. Her friends, the ones who had stopped checking on her after the funeral, the ones who did not know how to talk to grief, complimented her immediately. Where did you get that? It is stunning. You look amazing. Alice felt amazing. She felt seen. The coat fit her perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for her body, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The dreams began on the 2nd night. Alice found herself standing in a dim room with wallpaper that peeled in long skin-like strips. A woman stood before a mirror, wearing the red velvet coat. Her face was pale, beautiful, and utterly empty. As Alice watched, the woman reached up and touched the coat's collar, and Alice felt the touch on her own neck, a pressure that was almost tender. The woman turned. Her eyes were holes. Alice woke, gasping, the sheets tangled around her legs, the taste of copper in her mouth. She checked her phone. 3:27 in the morning. The 3rd day. At work, Alice found herself touching the coat constantly. It hung on the back of her office door, and between emails, between meetings, she would reach out and run her fingers over the velvet, feeling the texture shift beneath her touch. Warm. The coat was always warm, even in the aggressive chill of the office air conditioning. Her coworker, Marcus, noticed. "You have been wearing that coat a lot," he said, casual but probing. "Is it new?" "Vintage," Alice said. "I found it online." "It suits you," Marcus said. But his expression was strange, careful. "It really does." That night, Alice tried to research the coat. She opened her laptop and began typing. Red velvet coat curse, French antique demon warning, vestigages, vintage boutique. The results were sparse, scattered, difficult to interpret. But, buried in a Reddit thread on paranormal fashion, someone had posted a photograph. The coat, her coat, the exact same coat, down to the pattern of wear on the left cuff. The post was from 2 years earlier. A woman in Portland had bought the coat from an estate sale. She described the note, the warning, the way the coat felt like it was watching her. She tried to donate it to a homeless shelter on the 6th day, but the shelter had refused it, some policy about accepting only new items. She tried Goodwill, but the bins were locked after hours. She tried leaving it on a park bench, but when she returned home, the coat was hanging in her closet again, as if it had never left. The post ended abruptly. "I do not know what to do. It is midnight, in 4 hours. Please, if anyone knows how to stop this, tell me." There were no follow-up comments from the original poster. The account had been deleted. Alice closed the laptop. Her hands were shaking. This was absurd. Coats did not haunt people. Demons did not live in fabric. The note was a prank. The Reddit post was creative writing, and she was letting grief make her paranoid. She wore the coat to dinner with her father that night. He did not comment on it, but he looked at her strangely. The way people looked at things they could not quite identify. "Are you sleeping?" he asked. "You look tired." Alice was tired. She was so tired. But every time she tried to remove the coat, every time she reached for the zipper, her hands would not obey. The coat was comfortable. The coat was perfect. Why would she take it off? On the 5th day, Alice began to see the others. She was walking through the grocery store, the coat draped over her arm because the store was too warm, when she saw a woman standing in the produce section. The woman was staring at Alice, her face slack, her eyes enormous and wet. She was wearing a red velvet coat. The same coat. Identical in every detail. Alice blinked, and the woman was gone. In her place stood an elderly man in a windbreaker, squeezing avocados. That night, Alice tried to burn the coat. She carried it to her small backyard. The one her mother had always wanted to turn into a garden but never had time to cultivate, and piled it on top of old newspapers and cardboard. She doused it with lighter fluid. She struck a match. The coat would not catch. The flames licked at the velvet, curled around the fabric, but nothing burned. After 10 minutes, Alice gave up, gasping and ash-streaked, and carried the coat back inside. It was not even warm to the touch. On the 6th day, Alice admitted to herself that she believed. She spent hours searching for someone, anyone, who qualified as poor enough, desperate enough, to accept the coat willingly. She went to the downtown area where the homeless gathered beneath the overpass, carrying the coat in a canvas tote bag so she would not have to touch it. There was a woman there, sitting on a flattened cardboard box, a blanket wrapped around her thin shoulders. Her name was Alma. She had kind eyes and dirt beneath her fingernails, and a small dog curled against her side. "Excuse me," Alice said, her voice too loud, too bright. "I have something for you. A coat. It is very warm. Please take it." Alma looked at the coat. She looked at Alice. She did not reach for it. "I cannot take that," Alma said quietly. "Why not?" Alice heard the desperation in her own voice, ugly and raw. "Please. You need it more than I do." "No, Alma said, and there was something ancient in her gaze, something that knew more than Alice wanted to understand. That coat, it does not belong to anyone living. You should not have it either. Alice tried 3 more people. A teenage boy with a sleeping bag, an older man with a shopping cart, a couple huddled together beneath a stained quilt. None of them would take the coat. They looked at it the way people looked at roadkill, at things that were wrong in a way that language could not capture. It was 11:45 on the 7th night when Alice remembered the donation bin toy. She had driven past it 100 times, a large green receptacle in the parking lot of a shopping center, painted with cheerful logos and slogans. Donations welcome. Help those in need. The bin was always there, always empty, always waiting. Alice drove faster than she should have, the coat in the passenger seat beside her, buckled in like a person. She did not look at it. If she looked at it, she would see the way it moved in the corner of her vision, the way it seemed to breathe. The parking lot was empty. The stores were closed. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows across the asphalt. Alice pulled up to the donation bin and grabbed the coat, her fingers sinking into the velvet like it was flesh, and threw it into the metal slot. She heard it land with a soft, final sound. 11:57. Alice sat in her car, engine running, watching the clock on her dashboard. 11:58. 11:59. Midnight. Nothing happened. Alice started laughing, high and breathless, relief flooding through her like cold water. She had done it. She had given the coat to charity, to the poor, exactly as the note demanded. She was free. She drove home, her hand steady on the wheel, and fell asleep within minutes, dreamless and deep. The news alert arrived 3 days later. A small headline buried beneath celebrity gossip and political scandals. Charity donation, scam exposed. Dozens of false bins across Arizona. Alice read the article slowly, the words blurring and sharpening, blurring and sharpening. The green bins, the ones with the cheerful logos, were not operated by any legitimate charity. They were owned by a private company that collected donated goods and sold them for profit. None of the items ever reached the poor. None of the items ever reached anyone in need. It was a scam, simple and efficient, operating in plain sight for over 2 years. Alice's hands went numb. She had not given the coat to the poor. She had given it to a for-profit scam. The condition had not been met. The cold started in her chest, a spreading numbness that moved outward like frost across glass. Alice tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. She collapsed onto her living room floor, the carpet rough against her cheek, and felt something pulling at her, not her body, but something deeper, something essential. She thought of her mother, of the way her hand had felt in those final moments, warm and papery and real. Then she thought of nothing at all. The police found Alice Brennan 3 days later after her father, worried by her silence, used his spare key to check on her. She was sitting upright on her sofa, eyes open, face composed. The medical examiner could find no cause of death. No trauma, no drugs, no underlying conditions. Her heart had simply stopped. The red velvet coat was found in her closet, hanging neatly on a padded hanger. It was donated to a local thrift store by her father, who did not know its history, who only knew that his daughter had loved beautiful things. The coat sold within a week. The woman who bought it found a note in the pocket, old and yellowed, written in cramped French script. She translated it carefully, then laughed and threw it away. A curse. How delightfully theatrical. She wore the coat that evening to a gallery opening. Everyone complimented her. She looked stunning. She looked perfect. She looked like she was meant to wear it. Fear is not always rational. Sometimes it is a warning written in a dead language, folded into a pocket, waiting for someone to ignore it. And charity, true charity, is not about convenience or tax deductions or feeling good about ourselves. It is about sacrifice. It is about giving when it costs us something real. Those who mistake performance for compassion learn, eventually, that some debts cannot be paid in metal bins and empty gestures. By then, of course, it is far too late. The code is patient. It has waited before. It will wait again. Tonight, we explore what happens when the dead refuse to stay silent, and when the living choose not to listen. Now, let me tell you about Eleanor Ashworth and the terrible choice she witnessed in the autumn of 1873. Eleanor had served as clerk to the Ravenmore household for 7 years, when Josiah Ravenmore finally died. She was 29 years old then, a woman of education and poverty in equal measure, dependent on her position for survival. She had learned to move through that house like smoke, present but unnoticed, recording the family's affairs in ledgers that smelled of leather and lampblack. The household rejoiced when Josiah Ravenmore stopped breathing. That is not an exaggeration, nor a figure of speech. They rejoiced. The tyrannical patriarch had ruled Ravenmore Hall for 42 years, and his cruelty was legendary, methodical, absolute. He beat his servants with riding crops. He starved his own children for minor infractions. He forced his wife, Lucretia, to sleep on the floor of his chamber like a dog whenever he suspected her of independent thought. When Dr. Pemberton pronounced him dead, the entire household exhaled. It was, Eleanor would later recall, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. But Josiah Ravenmore had one final act of terror planned, even from beyond death. He feared premature burial. It was not an uncommon fear in those days. The cholera epidemics of the mid-century had created a panic around misdiagnosed death, and stories filled the newspapers of coffins opened to reveal scratch marks on the inside of the lid, fingernails torn and bloody, faces frozen in eternal screams. Taphophobia, they called it. The fear of being buried alive. And Josiah, for all his cruelty to the living, was terrified of waking in the dark earth. During the Victorian era, over 30 different safety coffin designs were patented in Germany alone, and mechanisms for communication between the buried and the living became commonplace history collection Wikipedia. Josiah had commissioned the most elaborate of these systems for his own grave. Before his death, he had constructed a private mausoleum on the grounds of Ravenmore Hall, a stone structure with iron doors that stood beneath a twisted oak tree. Inside, his coffin rested on a marble platform. Above it, a tube ran from the coffin, up through 6 feet of earth, emerging at ground level where it connected to a large brass bell mounted on an iron frame. A cord ran down through the tube, fixed to a mechanism inside the coffin that would be placed in his hand. The entire household was assembled in the drawing room 3 days before his death, forced to listen as Josiah, barely able to speak through the fluid drowning his lungs, made them swear an oath. "Should the bell ring?" he rasped, his eyes moving from face to face with predatory focus. "You will dig me out." Immediately. No matter the hour. No matter the weather. "You will break open the coffin and restore me to the air. Swear it." They swore. One by one. What choice did they have? Eleanor watched Lucretia's face as she spoke the words. The woman's expression never changed. Smooth, porcelain, empty. But her hands, folded in her lap, trembled. Josiah died on a Tuesday, in the afternoon, when the light through the windows turned amber and thick. Eleanor was present, recording the time and witnesses for the death certificate. His eyes remained open. Even in death, he seemed to be watching. The funeral was held the following day. It rained, which the servants took as a blessing. Perhaps God himself was washing the stain of Josiah Ravenmore from the earth. The coffin was sealed, lowered into the mausoleum, and the iron door was locked. The bell stood above the grave, silent and enormous, its brass surface gleaming wet in the rain. That night, The household slept better than they had in years. Eleanor woke to the ringing just past midnight on Thursday. It was not the church bell announcing the hour. It was a different sound, higher-pitched, frantic, insistent. It came from outside, from the direction of the mausoleum. The bell. Josiah's bell. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. The bell rang and rang and rang, a desperate clanging that shattered the silence of the house like glass. Footsteps thundered through the hallways. Voices shouted. Eleanor pulled on her robe and hurried downstairs, where she found the entire household gathered in the entrance hall, staring at the front door. Beyond it, through the windows, the bell continued its terrible song. Lucretia stood at the center of the group. She wore a black mourning dress, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She looked at the servants, at her grown children, at Eleanor. Her expression was calm. "It is the wind," she said. The head butler, a man named Graves who had served the family for 30 years, shook his head. "Madam, there is no wind tonight. The air is still." "It is the wind," Lucretia repeated. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. Or perhaps the mechanism has malfunctioned. A rat in the tube, pulling at the cord. It is not him. One of the younger maids, a girl named Sarah, began to cry. "But we swore, madam. We swore an oath." Lucretia turned to look at her. The silence stretched. The bell continued its frantic ringing. "We swore," Lucretia said quietly, "to honor a monster's final act of control. And I am finished being controlled." She walked to the door, locked it from the inside, and pocketed the key. "No one," she said, "will open that door. No one will investigate the bell. It will stop on its own. We will wait." The bell did not stop on its own. It rang through the night, a rhythmic, desperate clanging that seemed to penetrate walls and settle in the bones. Eleanor sat in the servants' quarters with the others, none of them speaking, all of them listening. The sound had a pattern, she realized. Not random. Deliberate. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. A signal. By dawn on Friday, the ringing had not ceased. The household moved through their duties like ghosts, hollow-eyed and silent. Lucretia remained in the drawing room, embroidering, her needle moving through cloth with mechanical precision. When Graves approached her again, she did not look up. "Madam, the bell." "I can hear the bell, Graves. We must investigate. We must do nothing." Graves stood there, his hands trembling. He was an old man, weathered by years of service, and Eleanor saw him break in that moment. Saw the exact second when obedience overrode conscience. He bowed his head and walked away. Eleanor found herself standing at a window that overlooked the grounds. From there, she could see the mausoleum, the bell above it dancing frantically, pulled by the cord below. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. She felt sick. By Friday evening, the ringing began to slow. Not stopping, but weakening. The pauses between the 3-ring sequences grew longer. The sound itself became irregular, as if the force pulling the cord was losing strength. Eleanor stood in the hallway outside Lucretia's room that night and listened to the woman humming. Actually humming. A lullaby soft and tuneless, as the bell outside weakened and choked. Saturday morning arrived with fog that clung to the ground like burial shrouds. The bell rang 3 more times, very faintly, and then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing. It was absolute, suffocating. The household moved through the day in that silence, and no one spoke of what had happened. No one asked permission to investigate. They simply endured. It was Sunday afternoon when the constable arrived. Someone, Eleanor never learned who, had sent word to the authorities about the ringing. The constable was a broad man with a kind face and skeptical eyes. He listened to Lucretia's explanation, the wind, the malfunction, her calm assurance that everything was fine, and then he asked to see the grave. They walked across the grounds together, a small procession. Eleanor followed at a distance, her role as clerk requiring her presence for any official proceedings. The fog had lifted, and the autumn sun cast long shadows across the grass. The constable examined the bell mechanism. The cord, he noted, was taut, stretched, as if something had been pulling it from below. He turned to Lucretia. "When was your husband buried?" "Wednesday afternoon." "And when did the bell begin ringing?" "Thursday night," she said. "Just past midnight. It rang for approximately 48 hours. The constable's expression changed. Something moved behind his eyes. Understanding. Horror. "You must open the mausoleum," he said. "I will not." "Madam, I am not asking." They broke the lock. The iron door swung open with a groan that sounded, Eleanor thought, like a scream trapped in metal. The air that rushed out was cold, chemical, wrong. The constable descended the stone steps, and Eleanor, against every instinct, followed. The coffin sat on its marble platform, undisturbed. The cord ran down through the tube, disappearing into a small hole drilled through the lid. The constable pulled a crowbar from his coat and began to pry the lid open. Eleanor would never forget the smell that rose when the seal broke. Decay, yes, but also something else. Sweat, desperation. The smell of a man who had been very, very afraid. Josiah Ravenmore lay inside, exactly as he had been placed. His face was gray, his eyes closed, his hands folded on his chest. The cord was not in his hand. The constable frowned. He reached down, moved Josiah's body slightly, checking beneath it. Nothing. He looked around the coffin's interior, searching for the mechanism, for the end of the cord. That was when he noticed the tunnel. It began at the far end of the coffin, where the wood had been scratched and splintered from the outside. Someone had dug through the wall, creating a narrow passage that extended into the earth beyond. The constable took out a lamp, lit it, and crawled into the tunnel. He returned 15 minutes later, his face ashen. "There's a body," he said. "In the tunnel. A man. Young. He was digging toward the coffin when the tunnel collapsed. He must have accidentally triggered the bell mechanism as he suffocated." Eleanor felt the world tilt. She gripped the stone wall to steady herself. "Who is he?" The constable shook his head. "I do not know. But he was carrying this." He held up a leather satchel, muddy and torn. Inside were papers. Documents. A birth certificate. Historical records from the Victorian era are filled with stories of illegitimate children fighting for recognition from aristocratic families. Amazon. William Ashford's birth certificate identified his mother as a former housemaid at Ravenmore Hall. His father's name had been left blank, but the documents in his satchel told the rest of the story. Letters. Pleas for recognition. Legal papers attempting to prove his claim as Josiah Ravenmore's unacknowledged son. William Ashford had been 23 years old. Poor. Desperate. And he had believed that if he could not inherit while Josiah lived, perhaps he could steal something of value from the grave after he died. He had dug the tunnel over 3 nights, working in darkness, racing against time before the ground settled. He had broken through the coffin wall just as the earth above him gave way. The collapse had trapped him. In his panic, his dying movements, he must have grabbed at the cord mechanism, triggering the bell. And for 2 days, as his air ran out, he had pulled that cord. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. A signal no one answered. Eleanor turned to look at Lucretia. The woman stood in the doorway of the mausoleum, backlit by the late afternoon sun. Her face was still calm, still empty. "Did you know?" the constable asked her. Know what? Did you know about the sun? Lucretia was silent for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, I suspected. Josiah had dalliances. I learned to recognize the patterns. The housemaid left rather suddenly, years ago. Pregnant, I assumed. It was none of my concern. And when the bell rang, I thought it was my husband. Her voice did not waver, clawing his way back to torment us further. I thought, let him ring. Let him scream into the darkness the way he made us scream. Let him know what it feels like to be unheard. But it was not your husband. No? Lucretia's eyes moved to the tunnel, to the place where William Ashford's body lay buried in collapsed earth. It was not. The constable ordered the tunnel excavated. William's body was removed, identified, buried in the paupers section of the village cemetery. Josiah remained in his coffin, undisturbed, finally and truly dead. 3 weeks later, Lucretia Ravenmore was found in her bedroom, a bottle of laudanum empty on the nightstand. The note she left contained only one sentence. I heard him. The inquest ruled it a suicide. Guilt, they said, over allowing a man to die. Eleanor attended the funeral standing at the back of the small crowd. She thought about Lucretia's face in the mausoleum, the blankness of it. She thought about how long it takes for someone to suffocate in a collapsed tunnel. How William Ashford must have pulled that cord, ring after ring, believing someone would come. Eleanor left Ravenmore Hall shortly after. She could not remain in that house, could not walk past the mausoleum without hearing the phantom echo of that bell. She found work as a school teacher in a village, 3 counties away, and she never spoke of what had happened. Not for 40 years. But in her final days, in the winter of 1913, Eleanor dictated her account to a young nurse. The nurse recorded it faithfully, though she did not believe it. Ghost stories, she thought. The ramblings of a dying mind. But Eleanor was lucid to the end. She described the sound of the bell in perfect detail, the pattern of the ringing, the weight of the silence after it stopped. And she spoke of something else, something she had never told anyone. On the last night of the ringing, she had gone to the window. She had watched the bell move in the darkness. 3 rings, pause, 3 rings, pause. And she had seen a figure standing beside the mausoleum. A woman in a black dress, illuminated by moonlight. Lucretia had been there, watching, listening. She had known. Not suspected, known. Perhaps she had seen William digging, heard the collapse, understood what the ringing meant. And she had chosen silence. Had locked the door and pocketed the key and sat in her drawing room, embroidering, while a man died calling for help. Eleanor believed that Lucretia's suicide was not guilt over William's death. It was horror at what she had discovered about herself. That cruelty, when internalized long enough, becomes instinct. That Josiah's greatest legacy was not his wealth or his land, but the transformation of his wife into a mirror of his own monstrous nature. The nurse wrote it all down, and after Eleanor died, she filed the account away, unsure what to do with it. It was eventually donated to a historical society, where it sat in a box marked local legends and ghost stories, until a researcher discovered it in 2007. The story spread across the internet, shared on forums and horror sites, retold and embellished. Some versions claimed the mausoleum was haunted, that the bell still rings on foggy autumn nights. Others focused on William Ashford, turning him into a vengeful spirit. But those who read Eleanor's original account understood that the true horror was not supernatural. It was the choice Lucretia made. The deliberate decision to listen to a man die, bell ring after bell ring, and do nothing. Despite the widespread use of safety coffins in the Victorian era, there are no documented cases of anyone being saved by such mechanisms. Wikipedia. William Ashford's body was the closest the system ever came to preventing a premature burial. And he died anyway, not because the mechanism failed, but because the living chose not to respond. The bell was eventually removed from Ravenmore Hall. The mausoleum was sealed permanently, the tunnel filled with concrete. But the story remained, passed down through generations, a reminder of something we prefer not to acknowledge. That sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the dead clawing their way back to life. They are the living, standing just beyond a locked door, listening to someone die and choosing silence. Eleanor's final words, recorded by the nurse in January of 1913, were these. I think about the pattern. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. 3 rings, pause. It was not random. It was a signal, a plea, a rhythm of hope that help would come. And I think, how long did William Ashford believe someone would answer? At what moment did he understand that no one would come? That he would die in that tunnel, alone, unheard, while above him, a house full of people listened to his dying song and chose peace over mercy. The nurse asked Eleanor if she felt guilty for not acting, for not opening the door herself. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I was a clerk, a servant. I had no key, no authority, no power. But I had ears. I heard him, and I did nothing. She closed her eyes. The nurse waited, thinking she had fallen asleep. But Eleanor spoke once more, so softly the nurse almost missed it. We all heard him. The account ends there. No resolution, no redemption. Just the weight of knowledge that cannot be unlearned. Fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is an invitation to reveal what we truly are when no one is watching. And the scariest monsters are not the ones scratching at coffin lids in the darkness. They are the ones standing in well-lit rooms, listening to that scratching, and choosing not to open the door. Because some horrors are not inflicted upon us. Some horrors are choices we make, and then carry forever. Tonight, we explore what happens when a person removes themselves from the world, not through death, but through something far stranger, far more deliberate. So if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what is the current time there. Now, let me tell you about Claire Donovan and the auction that should never have taken place. Claire Donovan was a documentarian, 34 years old, based in Portland, specializing in stories about forgotten people, vanished histories, the small tragedies that slip through the cracks of public memory. She had made 3 short films about cold cases, about the families left behind when someone disappeared without explanation, without closure. It was while researching her 4th project that she found the coat. The estate sale was in a Victorian house in the hills outside the city, one of those sprawling mansions that had been subdivided and re-subdivided over decades, housing multiple families, accumulating layers of history like sediment. The woman who died had been a recluse, 93 years old, no living relatives. Her belongings catalogued and tagged for public sale. Claire went because she always went to estate sales. You never knew what stories lived in other people's objects, what narratives could be constructed from the things they left behind. The coat was hanging in a back bedroom, in a closet that smelled of cedar and thyme. Red velvet, antique, exquisitely preserved. There was a handwritten tag attached to the hanger. $150. Claire lifted the coat carefully. The fabric was dense, soft, the color of old wine. Beautiful. She checked the pockets out of habit, the way she always checked pockets, looking for receipts, for notes, for anything that might tell her who had owned this before. The left pocket contained a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. French script. A warning about a demon, about 7 days, about giving to the poor. Claire read it twice, her pulse quickening. This was a story. This was exactly what she looked for. She bought the coat immediately. At home, Claire spread the coat across her dining table and photographed it from every angle, documenting the construction, the wear patterns, the fabric composition. Then she began to research. She searched for other mentions of the coat, for similar stories, for anything that might connect the object to a verifiable history. What she found was a pattern. In archived newspaper articles, in true crime forums, in police reports that had been digitized and uploaded to obscure databases, there were mentions of women who had disappeared. Not many. Not enough to form a cohesive narrative. But enough to notice if you were looking. A woman in Seattle, 2018. Last seen wearing a distinctive red coat. A woman in San Francisco, 2014. Purchased a vintage garment days before vanishing. A woman in Scottsdale, Arizona, 2022. Found dead in her apartment, no cause of death. A red velvet coat hanging in her closet. Claire made a list. 17 names over 40 years, scattered across the western United States, all women between the ages of 25 and 40, all connected, however tenuously, to a red velvet coat. Most of them had simply disappeared. A few had been found dead, unexplained deaths, their bodies intact but somehow empty. This was bigger than a documentary. This was something else entirely. Claire decided to wear the coat. It was a journalistic choice, she told herself. Immersive research. If she wanted to understand what happened to these women, she needed to experience what they experienced. The note claimed 7 days. Claire would wear the coat for 7 days and document everything. Physical sensations, psychological changes, anything unusual. She started a video diary. Day 1. Wearing the coat. Feels normal. Soft. The fit is perfect. Day 2. Dreams last night. Standing in a dark room. Someone was watching me, but I could not see them. Woke up at 3 in the morning. Coat was warm when I touched it, even though the apartment is cold. Day 3. Saw a woman today who looked familiar, but I do not know why. She was wearing a red coat. When I tried to approach her, she vanished into a crowd. I think I am not sleeping enough. The coat is very comfortable. I do not want to take it off. Day 4. I found more names. 23 now. All of them gone. I tried to contact their families, but most of them would not talk to me. One woman, her sister, told me that she had warned her not to buy the coat. She told me that her sister changed after she got it, became obsessed, would not listen to reason. She said it was like watching someone disappear while they were still standing in front of you. Day 5. I understand now why they would not give it away. It is not that they could not. It is that they would not. The coat wants to be worn. It wants to be loved. And when you love something this much, how can you give it to a stranger? Day 6. I tried to throw the coat in the river today. I carried it to the Willamette and stood on the bridge and held it over the railing. My hands would not open. I stood there for an hour, crying, unable to let go. A man asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. The coat and I went home together. Day 7. It is 11 at night. I have 3 hours. I know what I have to do. Claire understood something that the others had not. The coat did not want to be given away. It wanted to be kept, cherished, worn until the wearer became indistinguishable from the fabric itself. But there was a loophole. The note said the coat must be given to the poor. It did not say the poor must accept it. At 11:30, Claire drove to the homeless encampment beneath the Morrison Bridge. She knew the people there. She had filmed there before, for a documentary about housing inequality, and they trusted her. She found Alma first, the woman who had been there longest, who ran an informal shelter in a cluster of tents and tarps. Claire knelt in the cold, damp grass and held out the coat. "I need you to take this," Claire said. "Please. Just hold it for a moment. You do not have to keep it. Just take it from my hands." Alma looked at the coat, then at Claire. "That coat is sick," she said. "It is wrong." "I know," Claire said. "But if you take it from me, if you accept it, even for a second, then I will have given it to the poor. The curse will be broken. Please." Alma was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took the coat. Her fingers brushed Claire's, cold and calloused and real. "You owe me," Alma said, and handed the coat back. Claire drove home, the coat in her lap, her heart pounding. 11:56. She had done it. She had given the coat to someone in need, and they had accepted it, even if only briefly. The condition was met. At midnight, Claire sat in her apartment and waited. Nothing happened. At 12:15 she started laughing. At 12:30, she hung the coat in her closet and went to bed. She never woke up. The police found Claire Donovan 2 weeks later after her editor, worried by her silence, contacted her landlord. The apartment was locked from the inside. Claire was lying in bed, eyes open, expression peaceful. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of foul play. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as undetermined. Her documentary equipment was found on her dining table, hours of footage catalogued and labeled. The last video file, dated the night of her death, showed Claire sitting on her bed, wearing the red velvet coat, speaking directly to the camera. "I understand now," she said. "It is not about giving the coat away. It is about becoming it. About letting go of yourself so completely that there is nothing left to claim. The women who disappeared, they are still here. They are in the fabric. They are in the lining. They are waiting. And I think I want to join them. It is easier than I thought it would be. It is almost relief." The footage ended there. Claire's father donated her belongings to various charities. The red velvet coat went to a Goodwill in Northeast Portland. It sold within 3 days. The woman who bought it posted about it on social media. "Best find ever. This coat is absolutely perfect." Several friends commented, asking where they could get one just like it. One of those friends was in Scottsdale. One of them was in Seattle. One of them was in San Francisco, posting late at night, saying she could not sleep, saying she had the strangest dreams, saying the coat felt like it was made for her. Some disappearances are not mysteries. They are choices. They are surrenders. They are the moment when a person decides that the weight of being themselves is too much, and something else, something softer and quieter and infinitely patient, is offering to carry them away. The coat is mercy, in its way. The coat is oblivion. And for those who are tired enough, lonely enough, grief-stricken enough, oblivion can look remarkably like love. The women are still there, stitched into the lining, woven into the velvet, waiting. And when you put the coat on, you can almost hear them, breathing, humming, welcoming you home. Tonight, we explore what happens when survival demands a price that transforms you into the very thing you fear. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what is the current time there. Now let me tell you about Dr. Garrison Hale, and the accident that should have killed him. The desert highway stretched endlessly beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at, the kind of merciless clarity that belongs only to places where nothing can hide. Dr. Garrison Hale had been driving for 6 hours through the Mojave, his pickup loaded with field equipment, specimen containers, and enough water to last a week. He was a biologist, 42 years old, divorced, childless, and entirely absorbed in his work studying desert adaptations and small mammals. He preferred the company of coyotes and kangaroo rats to people. People asked questions he could not answer about why he spent so much time alone. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust, when the tire blew. It happened so fast that Garrison barely registered the sound before the truck lurched violently to the right. He wrestled with the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and throat. The shoulder crumbled beneath the weight of the vehicle, and then there was nothing but air, the sickening sensation of freefall, and the desert rising up to meet him with casual indifference. The truck rolled 3 times. Metal screamed. Glass exploded into constellations. Garrison's head struck the window, the side panel, the ceiling, each impact a burst of white-hot pain that faded into darkness. When the vehicle finally came to rest at the bottom of the ravine, it was on its side, engine ticking as it cooled, oil bleeding into sand that drank it like water. Garrison Hale should have died in that ravine. The medical records would later show that his skull had fractured in 2 places, his ribs had pierced his left lung, and his femur had shattered so completely that bone fragments had severed his femoral artery. He had lost nearly 60% of his blood volume by the time someone found him. That someone was Aurelia. He woke to firelight, and pain so absolute it had texture, weight, presence. The pain had teeth. It was chewing through him methodically, starting with his leg and working upward, consuming him inch by inch. He tried to scream, but managed only a wet, rattling gasp. "Quiet now," a voice said. And it was a woman's voice, low and steady, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The binding is almost complete." Garrison's vision swam. He was lying on his back, staring up at wooden beams barely visible through the smoke from a fire pit. The air smelled strange, a combination of juniper smoke, copper, and something organic he could not identify. Something that reminded him of his lab, after dissections. "Where?" he managed, and the woman leaned into his field of vision. She was perhaps 60, perhaps older, with skin weathered by decades of sun and hair, the color of old silver pulled back in a thick braid. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they studied him with clinical detachment. She wore clothes that looked handmade, leather and woven fabric in earthy tones. Around her neck hung a necklace of small bones, delicate and yellowed with age. "You are at my home," she said simply. "You crashed. I found you. You would have died." "Hospital," Garrison whispered. Need a hospital. "The nearest hospital is 140 miles from here," Aurelia said, her tone suggesting this fact was as irrelevant as the weather. "You would not have survived the journey. So, I used another method." She moved away from him then, and Garrison tried to lift his head to follow her movements, but the pain drove him back down. He could hear her doing something near the fire, the scrape of metal, the rustle of dried plants. When she returned, she held a cup of something that smelled bitter and medicinal. "Drink this," she said. "It will help with the pain. It will also help with what comes next." "What comes next?" Garrison managed, but, even as he asked, exhaustion was pulling him under, the darkness rising like floodwater. "The change," Aurelia said quietly, and he heard her voice following him down into unconsciousness. "The transformation. I saved your life, Dr. Hale, but there was a cost. There is always a cost." Time became strange after that. Garrison drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find daylight streaming through windows he had not noticed before, sometimes waking to darkness punctuated only by the glow of embers. Aurelia was always there, administering her teas, changing bandages that should not have been clean, but somehow were, speaking to him in low tones about things he could not quite grasp. "The binding ritual is old," she said once, her hands working on his leg with surprising gentleness. "Older than the missions, older than the Spanish, older than the first people who crossed the land bridge. It is a way of tethering a dying spirit to something stronger, something that can hold life when the body cannot. I do not understand, Garrison whispered. You will, Aurelia said, and there was something in her tone that might have been regret, or perhaps resignation. Soon enough, you will understand everything. The dreams came on the third night. In them, he was running through the desert on 4 legs, his nose filled with scents so vivid and complex they were almost visible, layered information about prey and predators and the shape of the wind itself. He could taste the air, feel the texture of sand and stone beneath paws that were not paws, hear the heartbeat of a rabbit frozen in terror 100 yards away. The hunger was overwhelming, a need so fundamental it eclipsed thought, and when he finally caught the rabbit, when his jaws closed around its spine and felt it snap, the satisfaction was primal and perfect. He woke gasping, his mouth full of the phantom taste of blood and fur, and found Aurelia watching him from beside the fire. The first dreams, she said, nodding slowly. You are beginning to integrate with the binding. What did you do to me? Garrison demanded, and his voice cracked with something between fear and fury. What the hell did you do? Aurelia was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable in the firelight. When she finally spoke, her words were measured, careful, as though she were explaining something to a child who might not have the capacity to understand. Your spirit was leaving your body, she said. The injuries were too severe. Modern medicine might have saved you if you had reached it in time. But you did not reach it in time. You would have died in that ravine, Dr. Hale, and your body would have fed the scavengers, and that would have been the end of your story. I offered you another choice. I did not choose this, Garrison said. But even as he spoke, he remembered fragments, moments from that first night when he had been hovering somewhere between life and death. He remembered her voice asking him if he wanted to live, remembered his desperate, wordless affirmation, the plea that had risen from some part of him that was not ready to surrender. You did, Aurelia said gently. You begged for it. And so, I bound your dying spirit to a composite pelt, a vessel created from 3 sources. Coyote, for cunning and survival. Deer, for speed and awareness. And human, for the bridge between worlds. The words took a moment to penetrate, and when they did, Garrison felt his stomach turn. Human, he repeated, his voice hollow. You used human skin. Donated, Aurelia said, and her tone hardened slightly. From someone who understood the duty, the responsibility. The human element is what allows the consciousness to remain, what prevents the transformation from becoming complete and permanent. Without it, you would be only beast. Garrison wanted to vomit. He wanted to scream, to rage, to deny what she was telling him. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he did not want to acknowledge, he could feel the truth of it. He could feel something foreign and ancient coiled inside him, waiting, patient, inevitable. What am I? He whispered. You are Skinwalker, Aurelia said simply. You are guardian. You are the price paid to keep balance in places where balance has been lost. The healing happened too quickly. By the end of the first week, Garrison could sit up without pain. By the end of the second, he could walk, though his legs felt strange, as though they belonged to someone else and were only temporarily on loan. By the end of the third week, the fractures that should have taken months to heal had knit themselves back together, leaving only faint scars that looked years old. And every night, he dreamed of running. The dreams were vivid, consuming, more real than waking life. In them, he was something between human and animal, moving through the desert with a fluid grace he had never possessed in his actual body. He hunted, not from necessity, but from instinct, tracking scents and sounds that led him to rabbits, to lizards, to a young mule deer that he brought down with teeth and claws that felt as natural as breathing. He always woke with his mouth dry, his heart racing, and the certainty that these were not dreams at all. It was Aurelia who finally confirmed it. "You leave at night," she said one morning, her tone matter-of-fact as she handed him a cup of bitter tea. "You do not remember, but your body does. The binding is complete now. The transformation happens whether you will it or not." "I am not going anywhere," Garrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had woken that morning with dirt under his fingernails, his feet filthy despite having washed them before sleep, and the taste of something raw and bloody lingering at the back of his throat. "Come," Aurelia said, standing and gesturing for him to follow. "I will show you." She led him outside, behind the cabin, to a stretch of open desert where the morning light painted long shadows across the sand. There, scattered in a rough circle, were the remains of Garrison's nighttime activities. Bones picked clean, fur in small, torn clumps, the delicate skull of a rabbit, its jaw broken, its eye sockets empty and dark. "You do not remember," Aurelia said quietly, "because the beast and the man are separate during the change. But the evidence does not lie, Dr. Hale. You are hunting. You are feeding. And with each night that passes, the bond grows stronger." Garrison sank to his knees in the sand, his hands trembling. He wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that she was lying or mistaken or insane, but the evidence was irrefutable. He could feel the truth of it in his bones, in the new strength of his limbs, in the way his senses had sharpened over the past weeks. He could smell water a mile away now. He could hear the heartbeat of a lizard beneath a rock. He could see in near darkness, his vision adjusting to moonlight with an ease that was not natural, not human. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" "Because the desert needs guardians," Aurelia said, and for the first time, he heard genuine emotion in her voice, something that might have been sorrow or perhaps exhaustion. "There are things in the wild places, Dr. Hale. Old things. Hungry things. Skinwalkers who have lost themselves to the transformation, who no longer remember what it means to be human. They hunt people now, drawn to settlements and highways, and they leave evidence that cannot be explained, disappearances that follow patterns no one wants to acknowledge." She knelt beside him in the sand, her weathered face grave. "I was made guardian 43 years ago," she said, "bound to the same composite, the same duty. I have hunted 16 rogue skinwalkers in that time, creatures that were once human but forgot themselves, forgot the balance. And I am old now, Dr. Hale. I am tired. The transformations are harder each year, the hunts more difficult. I need someone to carry the duty forward. And then you crashed in my desert, close enough to death that the binding would take, and I made a choice." "You had no right," Garrison said, and his voice broke on the words. "No," Aurelia agreed quietly. "I did not. But I did it anyway, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was leaving the desert unguarded, leaving the rogues free to hunt, to kill, to spread. And I could not allow that, even if it meant damning you to this life." Garrison looked at her, this strange woman who had saved him and cursed him in the same breath, and he felt something shift inside him. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Teach me," he said finally, his voice raw. "If I am to be this thing, this guardian, then teach me how to survive it." Aurelia nodded slowly, and something like relief crossed her face. "Come," she said, standing and offering him her hand. "We begin tonight. You will learn to control the change, to guide it rather than be guided by it. And when you are ready, I will teach you to hunt your own kind." The training took years. Aurelia was a patient, but demanding teacher, pushing Garrison to master the transformation, to learn the difference between the beast's instincts and the human's will. She taught him how to track by scent alone, how to move through the desert without leaving prints, how to identify the signs of a rogue skinwalker, the wrongness in their patterns, the hunger that drove them beyond reason. They forget. she explained one night as they sat by the fire, her voice tired, but steady. The binding is meant to be temporary, a tool, a way to protect the balance. But some skinwalkers begin to prefer the beast, to spend more time transformed than human. And the more time they spend that way, the more they lose themselves. They forget their names, their families, their purpose. All that remains is the hunger and the hunt. How do you stop them? Garrison asked. You kill them, Aurelia said simply. There is no other way. Once they are too far gone, there is no calling them back. You track them, you corner them, and you end them. It is mercy, in a way. They are suffering, even if they no longer remember what suffering means. She taught him the rituals, the ways to strengthen the binding, the herbs and ceremonies that kept the human mind anchored even during the deepest transformations. She taught him how to identify other skinwalkers, the subtle signs that marked them as different, the way their eyes caught light too sharply, the way they moved with a fluidity that was just slightly wrong. And she taught him about the disappearances, the cases that made the news and then faded into obscurity, the hikers and campers who vanished without trace in the desert and surrounding wilderness. Some of them, she explained, were simply accidents. People who got lost or injured or fell victim to the elements. But others, the ones that followed certain patterns, the ones where search dogs could find no scent, where bodies were discovered miles from any logical path, partially consumed and arranged in ways that suggested both intelligence and madness. Those were the work of rogue skinwalkers. We are the secret the desert keeps, Aurelia said. We are the explanation that no one wants to believe, the answer to questions that people would rather leave unasked. And we endure because the alternative is unthinkable. By the 5th year, Garrison had participated in 3 hunts, tracking and eliminating rogues that had been terrorizing the edges of small towns and national parks. Each hunt left him shaken, the kills necessary, but never easy. The knowledge that he was ending something that had once been human weighing on him like stones. By the 7th year, he was hunting alone, Aurelia too old and frail to accompany him into the desert, though she still guided him with her wisdom and experience when he returned. And by the 10th year, Aurelia was dying. She went quietly, as though death were simply another transformation, another change to be endured with dignity. Garrison sat beside her bed in the cabin, holding her weathered hand, and listened as she gave him her final instructions. The duty is yours now, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You are guardian. You are the balance. Do not forget yourself, Garrison. Do not let the beast consume you. Remember your name. Remember your purpose. I will, he promised, though the words felt hollow, inadequate. And when you are old, Aurelia continued, when you feel the weight of the years and the transformations become difficult, you will find another. Someone dying, someone who would otherwise be lost. You will offer them the choice I offered you, and you will bind them, and you will teach them. The cycle continues, Garrison. It must continue. What if I refuse? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Then the rogues will spread, Aurelia said simply. Then the disappearances will multiply, and the desert will become a place of horror rather than balance. You know this. You have seen what they do. She died that night, slipping away between one breath and the next, her hand going cold in his. Garrison buried her behind the cabin, in a spot she had chosen years before, and marked the grave with smooth stones arranged in a pattern she had taught him, a symbol of guardianship and duty. And then he was alone. The years passed slowly after that. Garrison maintained the cabin, continued his hunts, and gradually became a ghost story himself, a figure occasionally glimpsed at the edges of small desert towns, a man who seemed ageless, who moved through the wilderness with unnatural ease. He learned to live with the transformation, to accept the beast as part of himself, rather than fighting against it. He learned to find a strange peace in the solitude, in the endless cycle of hunt and transformation and duty. But he also understood with growing clarity that Aurelia had been right. The transformations were becoming harder. His body, though strengthened by the binding, was aging nonetheless, and each change left him more exhausted, more uncertain of his ability to control the beast. He was becoming what he hunted, slowly, inexorably, and he knew that eventually he would need to find someone to replace him. Someone like Imani Okafor. The accident happened on a Friday evening in late September, when the desert was finally releasing its summer heat, and the air was beginning to carry the promise of autumn. Imani was a freelance photographer, 31 years old, driving cross-country to document vanishing small towns for a magazine feature. She was talented, ambitious, and entirely unprepared for the moment when a rogue skinwalker, a creature that Garrison had been tracking for 3 weeks, stepped into the road in front of her car. She swerved. The car left the highway, rolled twice, and came to rest in a ravine not 3 miles from where Garrison had crashed all those years ago. Garrison found her 20 minutes later, drawn by the smell of blood and gasoline, the wrongness in the desert's texture. She was dying, her injuries catastrophic, her breathing shallow and wet. And as he knelt beside her broken body, he felt the weight of Aurelia's final instruction, the burden of the cycle that must continue. "Do you want to live?" he asked quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Imani's eyes, glazed with pain and shock, found his face. She tried to speak, managed only a desperate pleading sound that needed no translation. "There is a cost," Garrison said, echoing words he had heard a lifetime ago. "A terrible cost. But you will live. Do you accept it?" He saw the moment she understood, saw the fear and hope and desperation war across her face. And then, barely perceptible, she nodded. Garrison lifted her carefully, ignoring her gasps of pain, and began the long walk back to the cabin. Behind them, the rogue skinwalker that had caused the accident watched from the shadows, unaware that it had just signed its own death warrant. The binding took 3 days, just as it had for him. Garrison performed the ritual exactly as Aurelia had taught him, mixing the herbs, speaking the words in a language older than English, older than Spanish, stitching Imani's dying spirit to the composite pelt he had prepared over years of careful collection and preservation. When she finally woke, confused and terrified and in pain, Garrison was there. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Safe," Garrison said quietly. "You crashed. You were dying. I saved you." "Hospital," Imani managed. "I need." "There is no hospital that could have helped you," Garrison interrupted gently. "So, I used another method. And there was a cost, Imani. There is always a cost." He watched, as comprehension slowly dawned in her eyes, as fear gave way to anger, and then to resignation. He saw the moment she felt it, the foreign presence coiled inside her, waiting, patient, inevitable. "What am I?" she whispered. "You are guardian," Garrison said, and began to explain. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. In the desert, where secrets were kept, and balance was maintained, the guardians walked between worlds, neither fully human nor fully beast, carrying their duty like stones that grew heavier with each passing year. And somewhere in the darkness, the rogues hunted still, drawn to the edges of civilization like moths to flame, waiting for the moment when the guardian's attention would slip, when the cycle would finally break. But not tonight. Tonight, the guardians were watching, patient and eternal as the desert itself, and the disappeared, those who had wandered too far into the wild places, would find no mercy in the darkness. Only balance. Only duty. Only the endless transformation that kept the monsters at bay. Fear is not always a warning. Sometimes it is an invitation, a threshold that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. The desert keeps its secrets, and some secrets are older than memory, older than civilization, older than the stories we tell ourselves about what is real and what is nightmare. We think we know the boundaries between human and animal, between guardian and monster, between salvation and damnation. But, in the wild places, those boundaries blur and shift like mirages on the horizon, and by the time we realize we have crossed them, it is far too late to turn back. The guardians walk still, carrying their terrible duty through the darkness. And when you see lights moving through the desert at night, when you hear sounds that your rational mind cannot explain, when you feel watched by something that understands you in ways no human should, remember this. Not all disappearances are mysteries. Some are simply the price of balance, the cost of keeping older, hungrier things at bay. The desert demands its guardians, and the guardians demand their successors, and the cycle continues, unbroken and eternal, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Tonight, we explore what happens when the people we trust with our minds become the architects of our terror. Now, let me tell you about Dr. Elena Vance and the nightmare she sold as salvation. The grant letter arrived on heavy paper, cream-colored, expensive. Dr. Elena Vance held it in her hands for a long time, watching autumn light filter through her office window, turning the edges gold. 6 weeks. A temporary residency on the Whispering Pines Reservation. The title was almost poetic. Psychological Services Consultant, Cultural Liaison. The salary was generous, almost too generous for what amounted to a sabbatical in the desert. She had built her career on rationality. Mass delusion, collective hysteria, the psychology of belief, these were her specialties. Her published papers carried weight in academic circles. Other psychologists spoke of treating patients with antisocial traits as both challenging and strangely engaging. But Elena had always maintained perfect professional distance. She was the observer, never the observed. The scientist, never the subject. The reservation had been experiencing what they called an epidemic. 17 patients, all reporting encounters with the same entity, a skinwalker. The reports were consistent in their horror, a figure that moved wrong, that wore familiar faces like masks, that watched from just beyond the reach of firelight. The tribal council wanted someone who could explain it, contain it, make it stop. Elena accepted the position without hesitation. She arrived after sunset, when the sky had turned the color of a healing bruise. The landscape was beautiful in its desolation, red rock formations jutting from sand like broken teeth, twisted juniper trees clawing at the wind. The wellness center where she would work sat at the edge of the community, a low building of adobe and wood that seemed to sink into the earth rather than rise from it. The director who met her was a woman named Sarah Benali, 50 or 60 years old, with silver threading through black hair and eyes that held a weariness Elena recognized immediately. Sarah's handshake was firm but brief, as if she could not bear prolonged contact. "Welcome, Dr. Vance," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, professional. "We are grateful you came. The situation has been difficult." Elena smiled, the practiced smile she had perfected over years of reassuring anxious patients. "I understand. I have reviewed the case files. Mass psychogenic illness is more common than people realize, especially in close communities during periods of stress. With proper intervention, we can address this." Sarah's expression did not change. "I hope you are right," she said quietly. "For all our sakes." The office they had prepared for Elena was simple, but functional. Pale walls, a desk, 2 chairs facing each other, a window that looked out toward the desert. The previous psychologist's things had been removed, but traces remained, a mark on the wall where a calendar had hung, the faint outline of furniture that no longer existed. Helena wondered briefly what had happened to her predecessor, but did not ask. Some questions, she had learned, answered themselves in time. The first patient arrived at 9 in the morning, precisely on schedule. His name was Thomas Begay, 34 years old, a teacher at the reservation school. His file described nightmares, insomnia, acute anxiety, all triggered by what he claimed was an encounter 2 months prior. He sat across from Elena with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on a point just past her shoulder. "Tell me what you saw," Elena said gently, her voice modulated to inspire trust. Thomas hesitated. When he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully, as if he was translating from a language Elena did not understand. "I was driving home from a council meeting," he said. "It was late, maybe 11. The road was empty. And then I saw something standing in the middle of the highway." He paused. Elena waited, her pen hovering over her notepad, her expression neutral and encouraging. "It looked like my brother at first," Thomas continued. "He was wearing my brother's jacket, the red one with the eagle on the back. But my brother was in Albuquerque that night. I knew it could not be him. And when I got closer, when the headlights hit it, I saw it was not right. The proportions were wrong. The way it moved, like something trying to remember how a person walks." Elena made notes, her handwriting precise. "Classic hallucination markers," she wrote. "Stress-induced misidentification. Pareidolia in low-light conditions." Thomas's voice dropped lower. It smiled at me. But the smile was too wide. Too many teeth. "What did you do?" Elena asked. "I drove past it. Kept driving. When I looked in the rearview mirror, it was running after the car. On all fours. Faster than anything should move." Elena nodded slowly. "Stress can create incredibly vivid false memories," she said. "Your mind was processing anxiety about your brother, perhaps guilt about not seeing him, and constructed a scenario that felt real. This is more common than you might think. Cases of therapists dealing with patients who experience manipulation often involve the therapeutic figure reframing the patient's reality, and Elena excelled at this cognitive restructuring." Thomas looked at her directly for the first time. "You do not believe me." "I believe you experienced something traumatic," Elena said. "But what you experienced was your own mind protecting you from something else, something more painful. Trauma often disguises itself." She prescribed medication for the nightmares, scheduled 3 follow-up sessions, spoke of cognitive behavioral therapy, of exposure treatment, of gradual desensitization. Thomas left looking uncertain, but hopeful, as if she had offered him a map through darkness. Elena felt satisfaction, clean and sharp. This was her purpose. This was her gift. The patients came one after another, each with their own variation of the same story. A shape in the dark. A familiar face that was not quite right. Movement that defied natural law. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Each time, Elena listened with perfect attention, her expression carefully calibrated between concern and reassurance. Each time, she explained the science of fear, the psychology of collective delusion, the power of cultural narrative to shape perception. One marriage therapist recalled a husband who said he wanted to understand why his wife made such terrible decisions, demonstrating a complete inability to empathize. Elena understood this dynamic, but from the other side. She knew exactly how to make her patients doubt their own certainty, how to plant seeds of rational explanation that would grow into full-blown reconsideration. By the end of the first week, 3 patients had reported sleeping better. By the end of the second, 6 had stopped having nightmares. The tribal council expressed cautious optimism. Sarah Benally watched Elena with something that might have been respect, or might have been something else entirely. Elena worked late most evenings, her office light the only one burning in the wellness center. She took notes, refined her treatment approach, prepared presentations for the council. The reservation settled into an uneasy quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a storm, fragile and watchful. On the 13th night, Elena went for a walk. The desert at night was a study in absence. No streetlights, no traffic sounds, no human noise at all, only the whisper of wind through sage and the distant, occasional howl of coyotes. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast shadows. Elena walked the dirt road that led from the wellness center toward the residential area, her hands in her jacket pockets, her breath visible in the cold air. She had always found darkness clarifying. In the absence of distraction, the mind worked more efficiently, made connections it might otherwise miss. She was thinking about patient 12, a woman named Rita Yazzie, who had broken down during her session, describing a figure that had stood outside her bedroom window for 3 consecutive nights, unmoving, wearing her dead daughter's face. Rita had been inconsolable, and Elena had worked carefully to rebuild her sense of reality, to help her understand that grief creates monsters, that the mind conjures what it cannot process. Elena rounded a bend in the road and stopped. Something was standing in the middle of the path ahead. For a moment, she did not move, did not breathe. The shape was human-sized, but wrong in ways she could not immediately articulate. The moonlight caught it strangely, making the edges seem to shimmer, to shift, as if the figure was not quite solid, as if it was something projected onto the air. Elena's rational mind catalogued possibilities. Coyote, deer, person, trick of light and shadow. Her pulse remained steady. She had never been prone to fear, even as a child. Fear required imagination, and Elena's imagination had always been subordinate to her logic. The shape moved. It did not walk. It flowed, like water poured into the rough outline of a person. And then it spoke, and the voice was her own. "You think you are healing them," the thing said in Elena's voice, perfect down to the slight rasp she got when tired. "But you are making it worse. You are teaching them not to trust themselves, not to believe their own eyes." Elena felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition. The kind of understanding that comes before a thought. The figure stepped closer, and now Elena could see details. It was wearing her face, her features, but assembled incorrectly, as if copied by someone working from memory rather than observation. The smile was too wide. The eyes were too far apart. The skin had a waxy quality, like plastic melting in heat. "You know what I am," the thing said. "You have always known." Elena turned and walked back toward the wellness center, her pace measured, controlled. She did not run. Running would be an admission. Behind her she heard something that might have been laughter, or might have been the wind. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her temporary quarters, a small apartment attached to the wellness center, with every light burning, and made notes. Detailed, clinical notes about stress-induced hallucinations, about the power of suggestion, about how immersing oneself too deeply in patients' delusions could create sympathetic experiences. She wrote, "Experiencing mild dissociative episode. Recommend reduced workload, better sleep hygiene, possible short-term anxiolytic medication." She did not write about the certainty she had felt, standing on that road, that the thing wearing her face had known her thoughts before she thought them. The sessions continued. Elena worked with renewed focus, determined to prove that what she had experienced was exactly what her patients had experienced, a trick of the mind, nothing more. Cases of individuals impersonating medical professionals have shown how people can maintain elaborate deceptions, but Elena was not deceiving anyone. She was helping. She was healing. Patient after patient began to improve. They stopped reporting sightings. They slept through the night. They thanked her, their gratitude genuine and touching. The tribal council praised her methods. Sarah Benally's weariness began to ease. And every night, Elena went walking. She told herself it was for exercise, for clarity, for the simple pleasure of solitude. But, she knew, in a part of herself she refused to examine too closely, that she was looking for something, or waiting for something to find her. The entity appeared regularly now, always at a distance, always wearing a different face. Sometimes it was Thomas Begay. Sometimes it was Rita Yazzi's dead daughter. Once, it was Sarah Benelli, standing at the edge of the firelight from a community gathering, watching Elena with eyes that held too much knowledge. Elena documented everything in her private notes, clinical and detached. Subject experiencing persistent visual hallucinations, consistent with projection of suppressed anxieties. Recommend immediate termination of residency and return to controlled environment. But she did not leave. She could not leave. Not yet. Not until the work was complete. By the 5th week, all 17 original patients had been successfully treated. The nightmares had stopped. The sightings had ceased. The reservation returned to its normal rhythms, the crisis averted. The tribal council scheduled a farewell dinner in Elena's honor, expressing gratitude for her expertise and compassion. Elena stood in her office the night before the dinner, looking at the files she had meticulously maintained. Success stories, everyone. Documented proof of her method's effectiveness. The kind of research data that would strengthen her academic reputation, cement her status as an expert in her field. Sarah Benelli knocked on the open door, startling her. "May I come in?" Sarah asked. Elena gestured to the chair. Sarah sat slowly, her movements careful, as if she was approaching something dangerous. "You did remarkable work here," Sarah said. "The community is grateful." "I am glad I could help," Elena replied. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My grandmother told me stories when I was young. About skinwalkers. About how they work. She said the most dangerous ones are not the ones who eat you. They are the ones who make you forget how to trust yourself. They make you doubt what you have seen, what you have heard, what you know to be true. And once they have done that, once they have taught you that your own mind is unreliable, you become easy to control, easy to harvest." Elena kept her expression neutral, professional. "Folklore often contains psychological insights," she said. "The skinwalker myth is fascinating because it speaks to fears about identity, about trust, about the fragility of perception." Sarah stood. She looked at Elena with something that might have been pity. "I hope you find what you are looking for, Dr. Vance," she said softly. "Or that it stops looking for you." After Sarah left, Elena sat in the dark office for a long time, listening to the building settle around her, to the wind outside, to the sound of her own breathing. The farewell dinner was warm and genuine. Community members thanked her. Children gave her drawings. The tribal council presented her with a blanket woven in traditional patterns. Elena smiled and thanked them and accepted their gratitude with appropriate humility. She looked at their faces, at the relief and hope she had restored, and felt pride. Clean, uncomplicated pride. She had done this. She had taken their fear and transformed it into understanding. She had given them back their sense of safety. Later, alone in her quarters, packing her belongings for the drive back to the city, Elena stood at the window and looked out at the desert. The moon was full now, bright and cold. Nothing moved in the darkness. She thought about the patients she had treated, about how carefully she had dismantled their certainty, how systematically she had taught them to doubt their own experiences. She thought about Thomas Begay, who now believed his brother had been in Albuquerque that night, even though phone records showed he had not been. She thought about Rita Yazzie, who had stopped seeing her daughter's face in the window, but who flinched now whenever anyone mentioned her name. She thought about what Sarah's grandmother had said, about making people forget how to trust themselves. And she thought about the things she had seen on the road, wearing her own face, speaking with her own voice. Elena finished packing. She loaded her car in the pre-dawn darkness, the sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. The drive back to the city would take 6 hours. She would arrive before noon, return to her regular life, begin writing the paper that would document her success. She started the engine and began to drive, watching the reservation recede in her rearview mirror. The road stretched empty ahead, arrows straight through the desert. The radio played quietly. The heat began to build as the sun rose. 50 miles from the reservation, Elena saw something in the road ahead. A figure, standing in the middle of the highway. She slowed, then stopped. The figure did not move. It was too far away to see clearly, but Elena knew what it was. Who it was. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, got out and walked toward it. As she approached, the figure solidified, took shape, became her. Perfect now. No longer a crude copy, but an exact duplicate, down to the small scar on her left eyebrow, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the exact shade of exhaustion in her eyes. You did well, the thing said in her voice. They trust their fear less now. They doubt their own minds. They will be easier next time. Elena stood very still. Next time? The figure smiled, and this time the smile was perfect, was hers. There is always a next time, it said. Always another community, in crisis. Always another expert needed. You will go where you are called. You will do what you have been doing. And you will harvest them for me. I do not understand, Elena said, though she did. She understood completely. Yes, you do, the thing said gently, almost kindly. You have always understood. You created me, Dr. Vance. You called me into being with every session, every careful explanation, every time you taught someone that what they knew to be true was actually a symptom. I am the doubt you planted. I am the rational explanation that sounds so reasonable, it must be believed. It reached out and touched Elena's face, and its hand was cold, was nothing, was a void shaped like a palm. A Texas doctor falsely diagnosed patients with chronic illnesses to keep them returning for unnecessary treatments, creating a cycle of dependence. Elena realized she had done something similar, but with belief itself. We will do great work together, the skinwalker said. We will help so many people. We will cure them of their certainty, their trust, their ability to know when something is hunting them. Elena felt something crack inside her chest, something she had not realized was whole. No, she whispered. Too late, the thing said. Much too late. You have been mine since the moment you decided their experiences were less real than your theories. Since the moment you chose your expertise over their truth. It leaned close, and Elena could smell pine smoke and decay, could see the vast emptiness behind its eyes, behind her eyes. And now you will spend the rest of your life telling people that monsters do not exist, the thing whispered. While I walk beside you, wearing your face, speaking with your voice, feeding on every drop of certainty you steal from them. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them, the figure was gone. The road was empty. The sun was bright and warm and ordinary. She walked back to her car, started the engine, continued driving toward the city, toward her apartment, toward the message on her answering machine that was already waiting, already offering her another residency, another community in crisis, another opportunity to help. In the rearview mirror, she thought she saw something running behind the car, keeping pace effortlessly, wearing her face like a mask. But when she looked again, there was nothing there. There was never anything there. That was the point. Individuals who create false credentials and maintain elaborate deceptions can operate for years within trusted systems. Elena understood this now with perfect clarity. She had become the thing she claimed to cure, the monster posing as the monster slayer, the predator disguised as the healer. 6 months later, Dr. Elena Vance accepted a position at a wellness retreat in the mountains of Oregon. 12 patients were reporting sightings of something in the woods. something that watched them through their cabin windows, something that wore the faces of people they loved. The facility director was desperate for help. Elena packed her bags with practiced efficiency. She reviewed the case files with professional interest. She prepared her presentations, her treatment plans, her carefully crafted explanations. And at night, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer knew which face was looking back. Some horrors do not announce themselves with fangs and claws. Some arrive with credentials and kind words, and the absolute certainty that they know better than you do what you have experienced. They do not eat you. They do not need to. They simply teach you that the thing stalking you is a figment, a delusion, a symptom to be cured. And by the time you realize your mistake, you have already forgotten how to trust yourself. You have already become prey that no longer knows it is being hunted. Dr. Elena Vance understood this now, and understanding changed nothing. She was the harvester and the harvested, the deceiver and the deceived, the skinwalker and the human wearing its face. The worst monsters, she had learned, are the ones we let inside willingly, the ones we pay to consume us, one rational explanation at a time, until there is nothing left but doubt and the empty promise of healing. And she would keep helping, keep curing, keep harvesting, because that is what monsters do when they have learned to walk upright and speak the language of compassion. They heal you to death, one careful word at a time. In academic circles, Dr. Elena Vance's paper on her work with the Whispering Pines Reservation was considered groundbreaking. Her methods have been adopted by mental health facilities across the country. When communities experience mass psychogenic illness, she is often the first one called. She always accepts. And wherever she goes, the sightings stop. Eventually,